One-Up Media.
For millions of people worldwide, the mention of the island of Bali in Indonesia instantly evokes an image of paradise and tropical bliss. With its pristine beaches and stunning scenery, the island attracts millions every year. During the day, tourists soak up the sun, and at night, bars and clubs are bustling with activity. This was no different back in October of 2002, during the island's peak tourist season. Along the Kuta Beach nightclub district, a pub named Paddy's Bar was packed with people. The crowd consisted mostly of tourists from Australia, the UK, and America, all eager to down some drinks and enjoy the night. Outside along the street, a local taxi driver named Aris Munandar parked his vehicle in the heart of Kuta Beach's nightclub district, patiently waiting for any of the partygoers to ride in his cab and call it a day. It was a Saturday, and tomorrow, he will be taking his son, Garil, to soccer practice, an unbroken tradition between father and son. That family tradition, however, would end that night. Because in a few minutes' time, over 200 people would be killed as 3 bombs rippled through one of Bali's busiest areas. One of the fatalities was Aris. On that fateful night, the nightlife district was engulfed in smoke, stained with blood, and filled with the agonizing screams of disorientation and pain. The explosions that shook Bali that night were widely known as the Bali Bombings, and it earned a notorious place in history as one of Southeast Asia's deadliest terrorist attacks.
A bomb blast on the island of Bali has killed at least 182 people in the worst terrorist attack since September 11.
From One-Up Media, this is Mass Murders. The island of Bali lies in the eastern portion of Indonesia, and it's a tropical getaway unlike any other. In the early days, Bali was a hidden gem, known only to a handful of travelers seeking adventure off the beaten path. With its pristine coasts, lush jungles, and captivating nature spots, the island served as a haven for those who wanted an escape from their busy lives. Within the swaying palm trees and stretches of white sand, locals also embraced a way of life steeped in peace and tranquility, guided by the ancient teachings of Hinduism. Soon, word of Bali's beauty spread, attracting a steady stream of visitors eager to experience its magic for themselves. It was not long until the idyllic island became a magnet for tourists, drawing hundreds, if not thousands, from across the globe. Among them, people from America, Australia, and the UK flocked to its shores, drawn by the promise of paradise. Bali's fame grew with each passing year to the point that it even earned several nicknames, including Australia's favorite backyard. Many Australians loved Bali, and one of them was a woman named Therese Fox. Therese worked as a nurse in Australia, and in October of 2002, she decided to travel to the island of Bali with some friends for a quick break. But what began as a holiday of leisure and adventure would soon turn into a harrowing ordeal, not only for Therese, but also for hundreds of tourists. It was October 12, 2002, Therese's third day in Bali. After spending the morning exploring Bali's famous emerald-colored rice terraces and indulging in the thrill of bungee jumping in the island's lush jungles, Therese decided to head to Kuta Beach to relax and unwind. Earlier on, she had already made plans with a friend to head to Paddy's, an Irish pub just around the corner. So as evening approached, she left the beach and headed towards the pub to meet her friend. Since it was a Saturday, Kuta's nightlife district was bustling with activity, with throngs of people filling the streets. This lively atmosphere was perfect, and it set the stage for what should have been a memorable evening out. Paddy's Bar is just one of the dozens of bars and clubs lining up along Legion Street, the main road along Kuta Beach. That same evening, Sari Club, a nightclub that was meters away from Paddy's, was hosting dozens of Australian visitors, including members of 2 local football teams that were celebrating their recent victories. As the clock ticked to 11 p.m., local taxi driver Aris parked his cab along the street outside the pubs. With thoughts of his son's soccer practice the next day weighing on his mind, Aris longed for the comfort of home. Then, a mysterious white van appeared in front of him. It was an ordinary white Mitsubishi van that rumbled to a stop in front of Paddy's bar, blending into the chaotic streets of Kuta. The passenger doors slid open, and a man stepped out, his presence barely noticed amidst the throng of people. Through the corner of his eye, Aris watched the man as he swiftly made his way into the crowded bar and disappeared. Meanwhile, the van pulled forward, inching through the crowded streets before coming to a halt outside the club. Inside Paddy's bar, Therese's attention was drawn to the newcomer, who had just entered the doors. The man had a backpack slung over his shoulder, and when she saw this, a sense of unease grew steadily within her. Why would someone bring a backpack to a bar? What was he hiding inside? Therese couldn't help but wonder if she was being paranoid. Maybe it was the drinks clouding her judgment, or maybe she was simply overthinking things. Yet despite her doubts, she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was weird. She watched the man's eyes darting around the bar, surveying his surroundings with a keen intensity, just like a predator that was sizing up its prey. It was 11:05 p.m. when the man went inside the bar, and what happened next was something she would never forget. In an instant, chaos erupted as a deafening explosion tore through the room. The air was filled with a blinding flash of light, followed by a deafening roar that reverberated through the walls. Glass shattered into shards, tables and chairs were sent flying, and screams pierced through the air. Then, thick plumes of smoke and dust billowed upwards, engulfing the establishment in a suffocating haze. You could see flames erupting on the walls and ceilings, all while panic-gripped patrons frantically pushed through the chaos in a desperate bid to escape. Outside, a flood of partygoers spilled onto the streets, fleeing from neighboring bars as well. The deafening blast had pierced through the pulsating music of the surrounding venues, and now, people were coming out to the streets from every direction, their faces etched with fear and confusion. As smoke rose from Paddy's and flames flickered, people turned their attention to the chaos unfolding around them. Some of them were clearly injured and were staggering on the street, adding to the sense of urgency and confusion. But what happened next was the last thing anyone had anticipated. As more curious bystanders piled into Legion Street, relief turned to terror as the ground beneath them shook with the force of a second, more powerful blast that detonated right in front of Sari Club. In an instant, the second blast tore through its nightlife district, followed by the eruption of a large fireball that lit up and devoured everything around it. The air was thick with smoke, and the acrid scent of burning debris hit the nostrils of those caught in the midst of the inferno. Screams of terror pierced the night, and people ran desperately to escape the horror unfolding around them. The impact from the blast was so powerful that it even tore their clothes and left them scrambling for safety, with their bodies battered and bruised. The twin explosions had ripped through everything in its path, reducing buildings to rubble and leaving behind nothing but charred remnants. Nowhere was the devastation felt more intensely than in Sari Club, where the scene was one of utter destruction. The club lay in ruins, its walls reduced to piles of debris, its interior engulfed in flames that licked at the night sky. Inside, trapped patrons struggled in desperation as the fire had caused the roof to collapse, sealing off any hope of escape. With no exits on all 3 sides of the club, those trapped within were left to fend for themselves as the burning flames closed in. Thick smoke surrounded them, and the heat had already become too unbearable. As the fire raged on, it devoured everything in its path: buildings, cars, and even people. Vehicles were burned so badly that their metal skeletons glowed red hot. The fire was so intense that it had caused some of the cars to drip molten aluminum. Even people as far as 400 meters away saw the hell that descended upon Kuta beach, as the fiery glow from the fireball painted the night sky a deep blood red. When the chaos started to subside on the morning of October 13, 2002, Kuta beach was transformed into a war zone. The nightmare last Saturday evening left an indelible mark. In the aftermath of the incident, a small crater was formed in front of what were the remains of Sari Club. As dawn broke over Bali, firefighters and emergency personnel were seen hard at work with the cleanup efforts. The scene was grim, as the daylight revealed the extent of the devastation. Corpses, many charred from head to toe, were carefully placed on gurneys and stretchers, steadily emerging from the blast site. One of them was Aris, whose body was so severely burned that his face became unrecognizable. It was nothing but black, charred skin. His eyes, lips, and nose were gone. Meanwhile, it's been over 8 hours since Aris last contacted his family. Then police knocked on the door of his house, and his 10-year-old son, Garil, answered. The boy probably didn't know what was going on, but the police did. They were there to escort the boy to the morgue. At the time, Indonesian officers were in the process of identifying all the fatalities from the twin explosions when they stumbled upon a burnt and mangled taxi. They needed to confirm if the body found inside was indeed Aris. In the morgue, Garil takes a deep breath and slowly walks toward the row of bodies. The coroner then lifted the sheets, showing the boy one of the corpses on the steel gurneys. Garil didn't recognize what or who it was, as his sights fell upon the badly burned body. But then something caught his eye: the hem of his father's favorite t-shirt. It was his father. Garil failed to show up to soccer practice that day, as he and thousands of people across the world mourn the loss of their loved ones killed in the explosion at Kuta beach. By the end of October 13th, a day after the explosions, Indonesian authorities had recorded over 200 dead, with a significant portion of the victims being foreign tourists. At the time, this was the first major terrorist attack on Indonesian soil and the deadliest in Southeast Asia. But in the days that followed, and as the full extent of the tragedy began to unfold, they realized that this was only the beginning of a harrowing journey. With pain, sadness, and anger gripping the hearts of people all around the world, there was one burning question on everyone's mind. Who the hell was behind all of this? When the explosions ripped through Kuta beach, the toll was catastrophic. Over 200 people were killed, and many of their bodies were charred beyond recognition. Most of those who perished were not locals, but rather tourists and visitors from various countries worldwide. Among them were travelers from the US, the UK, France, Germany, Switzerland, and Canada. But what's particularly alarming is that nearly half of the victims were Australian visitors. For Australians, Bali was more than just a vacation destination. It was a beloved playground. In fact, Australians have a deep affection for Bali, with 6 out of every 10 tourists on the island being Australian. Unfortunately, for many Australian visitors, their trip in October 2002 would tragically be their last. With 88 dead, it was the biggest massacre involving Australians in recent history, and it was something that the authorities did not take lightly. The Australian government, realizing the gravity of the tragedy, knew they had to do something. Within moments, John Howard, former Prime Minister of Australia, announced the deployment of a team from the Australian Federal Police to investigate the situation in Indonesia. Composed of more than 300 police officers, investigators, forensic scientists, and crime scene operatives, the group was the largest overseas deployment that Australia had ever sent, and they immediately flew to Bali, as dozens of families at home waited for answers and justice over the deaths of their loved ones. In the immediate aftermath of the bombings, rumors about how it happened started spreading like wildfire, some of which were plausible, while others were bizarre and almost ridiculous. Among the bizarre speculations were murmurs of ballistic missiles being launched from nearby US bases, which added a layer of geopolitical intrigue to the tragedy. However, perhaps the most outrageous and far-fetched notion was the theory of micro-nukes, small nuclear weapons that were detonated on Kuta beach, sparking fears of a catastrophic fallout. Other possible explanations sounded more believable. For example, some investigators were inclined to accept claims that the blasts came from gas leaks or a massive electrical outage, which would have explained the magnitude of the destruction. But among all the theories, one in particular immediately grabbed the attention of an Indonesian officer who later on gave the authorities the lead that they had been looking for. According to the theory, the explosions in Bali on October 12th occurred just a year after the world had witnessed the 9/11 attacks in New York City, and the fear of terrorism remained fresh in everyone's minds. One concerned citizen raised the possibility that what happened in Kuta Beach may have been the work of Al-Qaeda, the group responsible behind 9/11. At the same time, a local Indonesian police investigator thought that this explanation was, in fact, very possible, given what he saw during that fateful night. A few minutes before midnight on October 12th, the officer was out on patrol within the vicinity of Kuta Beach when he heard two loud explosions go off nearby. The first thing he saw was a red cloud billowing into the evening sky, resembling that of a mushroom. Then the raging inferno followed, which devoured everything from cars to people along its path. When the policeman entered the blast site to look for survivors, it was like hell on earth. He found burnt corpses inside cars, wrangled bodies on the streets, and vehicles crushed like tin cans. But what made the police officer believe that bombs had caused the blasts in Kuta Beach were the many lifeless bodies he saw on the streets. Disturbingly, some of the victims were left with missing body parts. Legs and hands had been separated from the torsos, which to the officer could only mean one thing. This could only be caused by a force as powerful as that of a bomb, or at least a sudden explosive force that was powerful enough to rip through human flesh. It was a horrific sight. But was this the work of terrorists, or merely an accident? As investigators tried to piece together evidence from the devastating attack, the forensic team returned to Paddy's Bar in Kuta Beach, the site of the first explosion. There, they unearthed critical evidence that not only confirmed their suspicions of a bomb being detonated, but also pointed them towards a possible lead behind the man who did it. At the remnants of Paddy's Bar, they found a twisted, charred coil of copper wire lying on the floor, which to us may not mean much, but the investigators knew that this wire was possibly part of a homemade IED, or an improvised explosive device. But that wasn't all. Something on the ceiling caught their eye. High above, they noticed splatters of blood on the ceiling. Forensic tests later revealed that these stains came from a single individual, and intriguingly, although the ceiling had splatters of blood, the floor directly beneath this area was clean and unscathed. Connecting the dots, the team deduced that someone must have been positioned directly above the bomb at the moment of the explosion. Furthermore, the unstained floor beneath the bloodied ceiling suggested that the explosion likely occurred in mid-air rather than on the ground. This crucial detail led investigators to a chilling realization. This was almost certainly the work of a suicide bomber. You see, suicide bombers have one objective: to inflict the maximum number of casualties, which is why they often target crowded areas. By detonating explosives in crowded areas like bars or public spaces, they would likely meet their goal of ensuring the most catastrophic of consequences. Historical evidence has shown that suicide bombers often position themselves in close proximity to their intended targets prior to detonating their explosives. And when police looked at the situation in Paddy's Bar, it is highly probable that this pattern was followed. However, the possibility of suicide bombers and even terrorist attacks happening on Indonesian soil was met with skepticism by the general public. Additionally, no terror group had claimed responsibility for the Bali bombings, at least not yet. Many experts, both in Indonesia and abroad, offered various reasons explaining why there was skepticism surrounding the belief that the devastation was caused by terrorists. Firstly, matters relating to terrorism primarily fell upon the Indonesian army and not the Indonesian National Police, who first responded to the blast site in Bali and tasked to solve the case, including identifying the possible perpetrators. In 2002, the Indonesian National Police was still a relatively new government body. Before this, the military and police in Indonesia acted as one agency, but after the fall of the Suharto regime, the new Indonesian government decided to disband the two, with the army assigned to focus on external security, such as terrorism. Secondly, there was also this belief that Suharto had eradicated threats such as terrorism and extremism during his reign, and people believed that this had forced any remaining radicals and extremists to seek exile elsewhere. Among those who fled Indonesia for their own safety was a man named Abu Bakar Bashir, who together with other notable Indonesian political personalities had been rather outspoken of their radical views to establish a pan-Islamic state in Southeast Asia. Bashir was a key figure in the formation of a group called Jemaah Islamiyah, also known as JI. We know now that JI would go on to pose a major threat to national security, but before the Bali bombings occurred, they were classified as an organization that was non-threatening. This leads us to the third point. In 2002, Indonesia faced significant political instability, prompting political leaders and law enforcement officials to exercise caution in attributing the Bali attacks to extremist organizations like JI. Despite the somewhat extreme and nearly radical nature of JI's ideals, Indonesian police hesitated to pin them responsible for the attacks, as they feared the potential backlash from the Muslim community. And one might wonder, given their earlier suspicions regarding JI's involvement in sending a suicide bomber to Bali, why didn't the police or government simply overlook the potential backlash and hold them accountable? Well, it's not so simple. Indonesia is a nation where a staggering 87% of the population is Muslim. What do you think would happen if the government were to accuse an Islamic group of orchestrating one of the country's most devastating attacks? The circumstances were undeniably challenging, because at that moment, no one could have thought that the JI group would go so far as to perpetrate violence against their fellow Indonesian citizens. But in reality, JI had already forged connections with Al-Qaeda, and the organization eventually transformed from a political entity to a terrorist group, operating not just in Indonesia, but also in Malaysia, the Philippines, and Singapore. Back at the grim scene in Kuta Beach, investigators once again sifted through the wreckage, each fragment telling a chilling tale. Bali had fallen victim to the ruthless hand of suicide bombers. Unmasking the perpetrators became another challenge, but fortunately, investigators did not have to look far to find their next lead. Among the twisted metal heaps outside Sari Club, an Indonesian investigator stumbled upon a burnt metal plate on the ground. When he picked it up and dusted it off, he noticed several numbers. These were the chassis numbers of a car that had been mangled in the incident. A chassis number is a unique identification number assigned to a vehicle during manufacturing. By looking up this number in the vehicle registry, you can find valuable information such as the vehicle's registration certificate or insurance policy. Authorities then peeled back the cover and ran the numbers through their database. This led them to a man named Ali Imran, and police would soon discover that he was a member of the core group responsible for the Bali bombings. Within a month of the incident, authorities tracked him down and arrested Imran in Java. During questioning, Imran didn't flinch from the truth. He confessed without hesitation that he and 5 others were the architects of Bali's tragedy, who were merely acting on orders from Jemaah Islamiyah. But it still didn't quite make sense. Why did they target the island of Bali? Well, it all began in 2001, when JI failed to carry out its plans to attack Singapore. In December 2001, just 8 months prior to the tragic events in Bali, Singaporean authorities apprehended 36 individuals, including top leaders and suicide bombers, with direct ties to JI. These suspects had plotted a series of devastating bombings that targeted vital infrastructures such as foreign embassies, subway stations, and water supply pipelines. While these arrests dealt a blow to JI's schemes, the group were determined in its campaign of violence across Southeast Asia. In response, its leaders shifted their focus from hard targets such as foreign embassies to softer targets like ordinary people. If they couldn't attack foreign embassies, the island of Bali was the next best thing. The island's international appeal became both an opportunity and a weapon for JI. With Bali being a hotspot for Western tourists, any catastrophic event there was certain to capture the world's media attention. Moreover, JI's deep-seated animosity towards Western nations like the US, UK, and Australia only helped to solidify their choice of targets. Majority of the Western tourists in Bali had originated from these countries, which made them prime targets for the JI's twisted definition of retribution. Killing these Western tourists would send a strong message of defiance to Western states, warning them not to meddle in their affairs or underestimate their resolve. Following the botched operations in Singapore, JI regrouped in a hotel in Thailand, where the Bali bombings plot first took shape. In total, 25 individuals were involved, including key figures like Ali Imran and several senior JI leaders. But it was a core group of 6, including a Malaysian engineer, who orchestrated every detail, from securing safe houses in Java to sourcing bomb-making chemicals in the Philippines. Imran's brothers Mukhlas and Amrozi, who handled logistics for the plans, recruited their brother for planning and execution. JI also enlisted the expertise of 2 bomb makers, Imam Samudra and Umar Patek, marking them as the 4th and 5th suspects. And the 6th was Dr. Azahari Hussein, an engineer and former university professor whose vast knowledge in explosives and bomb making earned him the nickname the Demolition Man. Hussein's intelligence and experience in dealing with explosives was pivotal in creating the 2 deadly devices that exploded in Kuta beach, leading authorities to tag him as the primary architect in the bombings. With his technical prowess, the group managed to create 2 powerful bombs, including the 300-kilogram explosive made from potassium chlorate and aluminium powder that detonated in front of Sari Club. The groundworks for what would become the Bali bombings spanned roughly 10 months, with the decision to target the island finalized in August 2002. Finally, when October arrived, the stage was set. Imran and his cohorts left their safe house in Denpasar on October 12th and set their sights on Kuta Beach and the US consular office. To this day, the Bali bombings in 2002 remain the deadliest act of terrorism, not only in Indonesia, but also throughout Southeast Asia. It is a stark reminder of the brutality of extremism and terrorism, and nowhere was this more evident than in the tragic events of the bombings, where the lives of more than 200 innocent individuals were cut short by the senseless actions of the extremists. The scale and ruthlessness of the attack highlighted the profound threat posed by such ideologies and it leaves an indelible mark on the global fight against terrorism. The people who were responsible for the attack had indeed committed one of the gravest sins of all, something known as mass murders. Mass Murders is a one-up media original. A quick word on our reenactments and dramatizations. While we can't know exactly what they say, think, or feel at the moment, it is all based on research. This episode was executive produced by Guang Jin, produced and written by Ethan Sam and M from One Up Media, edited by Alex, narrated by Jason, audio engineering by Vong An and Ethan Sam. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one.